Ask yourself, are you data-driven and digitally savvy? How deeply is your technology driving marketing success? Are you prepared and ready to make the most of data-driven marketing? What does a data-driven organization look like? And what's the best way to interact with customers? I mean, these are questions that are at the heart of marketing today. Data and analytics is the one aspect of marketing that folks tell us is most different from what it's been just even a few years ago, let alone the last 10 years. So hi, I'm Bruce Rogers. I'm the Chief Insights Officer for Forbes Media, and I also head up the Forbes CMO practice. And we are here today to help answer those questions and add some perspective and to talk about some research that Forbes Insights conducted in partnership with Turn to help you along this journey to become a digitally savvy, data-driven organization. So with us today is Paul Alfieri. He's the Senior Vice President of Marketing for Turn, and he's held senior marketing roles at Motorola and senior roles in the ad agency world, including Interpublic. Also joining us, and we're pleased to have, is Kimberly Whitler, who's the Assistant Professor of Marketing at the Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia, which, by the way, was ranked number 15 on the Forbes list of the best business schools in the world. And she is, in addition to that, has a very long and storied role in marketing, is a three-time CMO, and including roles at, most recently at David's Bridal, at Beazer Homes, and at PetSmart, which an incredible retail organization, the world's largest retail catering to pet owners, nearly $7 billion in sales, 53,000 employees and 1,300 stores. So an immensely complex business, and certainly all of those combined to a unique and rare perspective that Kimberly will share with us today as we discuss these issues. She's also has an impressive academic background, attended the Air Force Academy, and earned her PhD from Indiana University. Welcome.
Thanks, Bruce.
So let's start our conversation. As I said, Forbes Insights in turn undertook this research to find out why data-driven marketing is needed, to define what data-driven marketing is, and that's something we talked about. Just defining what it is not as simple a matter as one might expect, and certainly as the research has shown. And then we're going to talk about some of the best practices and where folks are in this journey as we've discovered in the research that we've done. And so we conducted, as I said, research among senior executives, 331 to be exact, in October, to answer, help us think through these issues and answer these questions. They were all director level and above. A little over a third were C-level executives in a range of industries, although a majority were large companies of 500 million or more. So a pretty good perspective on the marketing landscape as it relates to this issue. We're going to talk about trends in data-driven marketing. We're going to address the issues around organizational transformation, leadership skills and development, and measurement and technologies, because all of these interact, and you can't have a successful data-driven organization with addressing each of these issues. So let's dive into the question, and I'm going to start with Paul. 55% of our audience for this research said that they employed analytics to measure returns on most or all of their marketing programs. How would you define data-driven marketing? Let's start with the basics.
Sure, give me the easy question, right? I think what's interesting is when we did this survey, what you find is that even just the conception of data-driven marketing, everyone's got a different view of what that is. I think if you take it to data-driven marketing implies there's marketing without data, which I think is a false assumption. Marketing has always used data. What we're entering, though, is an era where data is less about gathering insights from a two-way mirror or a secret shopper clipboard, and more about real-time at scale data being collected from a variety of touch points. And so we view a turn data-driven marketing more about collecting and aggregating all of those sources that are now available about how your consumers are interacting with you, and then being able to find insight over that and use that insight as part of your planning and execution process. So real simple, right?
Yeah. So that's what we found. Insight is probably the key to that rather than just data access. How would you answer that question, Kimberly?
I think it is really complicated. What I started thinking about is what are the attributes of a better versus a worse data-driven organization, because I agree with you that I think all marketers are collecting data, are using data. It's the degree to which they're sophisticated in using it, and then the degree to which the organization is ready to absorb it and can use it. And so I think about things like the process within the organization, and it's not just within marketing. Is data-driven, is there a culture within the whole organization, not just the marketing department? Are there processes that support it? So, for example, I spent a long time at Procter & Gamble, and every recommendation that you write there has to say, why is it right for the consumer, and here's all the data that supports that. Why is it right for the customer, and here's all the data that supports that. And so they create a culture from every single level on up through the organization that all of your support has to be data-driven, right? Because every document is written, all recommendations are written down, and so they've created a cultural process by which it's embedded in the organization to use data to make smarter decisions.
That's an excellent point.
So not as many organizations have it so culturally embedded. That then makes it more challenging for marketing. So process, infrastructure, the culture, and then the skill. And I think this last point is something we're going to talk later about, but the skill is a real barrier right now.
Yeah, and Paul, maybe your experience dealing with the folks that you deal with on a daily basis, the real-time aspect of it, the difference is the data can be overwhelming.
Right.
Sort of making sense of the data is the critical aspect of it, and also there was a grand tradition of sort of data-driven marketing, even if it wasn't necessarily real-time in P&G, but that was not necessarily a marketing capability for many other organizations. So this is often new to some organizations where marketing transitioned from creating communications assets, broadcasting communications message, to really measuring and connecting with customers using data to do that. What is that like, helping people through that journey?
It's complicated and everyone is unique, I think is the way to think about it. I think, to Kimberly's point, it is a culture shift that has to happen throughout an organization. An organization has to think like an enterprise IT company and understand that data is a platform upon which products are built, financial decisions are made, and marketing decisions are made. What we're seeing is the marketing department is recognizing the availability of data that is out there to quantify and generate efficiency and also expand market share if they could just access it. And a lot of times what we see is that marketer willingness to innovate can come in conflict with a lot of the other organizations inside a company. You know, for example, you look at one of the core IT issues or IT charters, and it is to mitigate risk. It's to create stability and create a stable platform. And
Interesting.
I think there's been a lot written about, the CMO and the CIO need to be friends, and I don't want to go there. But what I think is the next layer down is businesses, in order to succeed, have to have a conversation around where are we willing to take risk, and what is core to our business that needs to be stable and risk needs to be mitigated. And once they understand that with respect to the data they're collecting and how they're dealing with their customers, the path becomes easy because owners are then defined. Your job is to protect this asset because it's important and we're going to lock it down. And your job is to go experiment and try something new. And so we're going to provide you with the right tools in the right location to do that. And so watching organizations go on that journey, we work with, you look at the top 100 spenders in ad spend globally, and 90 of them work with Turn. And every one of those journeys has been unique because owners are not clear, and who brings it into the organization is different, but they all seem to wind up at that same place, which is where are we willing to take risk and exploit this unique asset we have that's data, and where are we not?
It's interesting. You talked about the CMO-CIO connection and kind of our perspective and research that we've done about that specific relationship is it is a marriage. It may be a marriage of perhaps of convenience or requirement or a shotgun wedding, if you will, but it's certainly a marriage, and it's a marriage, unfortunately, in need of some counseling, I think, as well, because they see the world very differently.
I mean, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but, I have a good relationship with our CIO. I'm sure in your roles you have as well. We're all running the business together. Right. We're all senior executives, and we all understand what needs to happen. Culture shift needs to occur in the organizations underneath the senior executives. I haven't found a set of senior executives that aren't aligned, that don't think that data can accelerate the business, which is what we're talking about with marketing.
Exactly.
But hiring folks that aren't, and training our teams to be more collaborative in the right direction, I think is where the next challenge is for a lot of marketers.
Yeah, I think I've actually written a lot about this in Forbes, about the CMO-CIO relationship. I've done quite a few interviews, and most people have a desire to get along. Sometimes the reward systems within the company that the CEO has set up actually pit them against each other, because to your point, if the CIO gets fired, if they take on risk, they move too quickly, they spend a lot of money to bring in new systems, then their objective is to move slowly, right? Meanwhile, the CMO gets fired if they don't drive growth yesterday. Right, and so you've pit the two against one another. That's why it's so critical to make sure that you have some common measures so that they want to naturally work together. Right? Most C-level people do, but sometimes the system is not there to help support that and make that happen. And so when it's not working, I would look to reward systems. Are they motivated to actually work together?
Yeah, the research showed that more than half of the executives we spoke with see data as a key asset, one would hope. Can't imagine what the other half is thinking or what they're doing in marketing. But as the other half certainly admit that their efforts are lagging or siloed, and that is the operative word for many organizations that we talk to. I'm sure in both of your experiences, everyone has good intentions, but sort of the organization built up these silos that are the requirement of building scale in a modern organization, which may be a whole different thing, how large enterprises scale around organizational change, and that we maybe see changes there as well. But it's particularly pernicious to getting data to work across. So let's talk about some of the pitfalls and best practices. So how do you go about helping siloed organizations, and how to help them think through this, and kind of what are the best practices that you've seen in your experience, Kimberly?
Well, I think there is this tremendous gap between data-driven desire and data-driven ability, and it's because so much has to change for it to work. And I'm going to start with one very simple thing, which is the skill difference between, I think, some of the entry-level employees now and some of the senior leaders. Now, I can say this having gone back to school and doing a lot of studying over the past few years. What the students today are learning is actually quite shocking to me. I sat through a couple of decision analysis courses last week that our MBA students are taking. They're programming in Tableau, they're programming in R, they're programming in SPSS, they're programming in SAS, they understand conjoint, adaptive conjoint analysis. And the challenge is when the people above them don't have the same understanding, then you have kind of a communication gap. And I think back to one incident where a CFO and I worked together to do a multiple regression analysis to take a look at what would happen if we moved a lot of our in-store labor from full-time to part-time. We took it to the CEO. He didn't quite understand it. Now, that was our fault for not being able to educate him on how to read it, interpret it, but because there was a gap in understanding what regression was and how you use it, then the analysis wasn't accepted. And so one of the challenges is you've got this tremendous gap, and there's so many things that need to change. We've talked about culture. One of the key things is going to be skills, and I really do think at the mid and senior levels of organizations, if CEOs are serious about this, they're going to have to retool a little bit. They don't need to know how to program,
Right.
but they need to know that there's something beyond a hammer, that there's a saw, that there's a chisel, and they need to understand how these tools can be used to make better decisions. So one of the big areas I think that's going to have to happen is kind of an educational component. You've got the structure, the infrastructure, the processes, but you have the skill component that needs to be addressed for it to be successful.
That's a great point. Paul, in your experience, how are you helping your customers kind of bring the data and insights up through the organization so that they can better understand the power of data?
Yeah, first, I agree with what you just said, that skill gap and just that understanding and appetite for learning and thinking differently, getting different views into the business than maybe what we were trained. A lot of times when I hire people, I show them Ogilvy on Advertising, the book, and say, this is one of my great textbooks. I learned from this book. And 60% of it is no longer relevant to my job, right? And so you're coming at this from a different perspective, and I think that most marketers are doing just that. One of the key things that I think we see, it does go to organizational construct. If you silo your data with only one person who knows how to use Tableau and R,
Yeah.
and feeds that to the rest of the organization, you don't drive the culture change. Some examples that we see, there are organizations that try to be data-driven, but then when you look at their marketing programs, they're set up in siloed channels. And so maybe you have a great data person optimizing for a specific channel, but they're not necessarily getting the cross-business view of how what they're doing is impacting other activities, and so you don't really get the value from an organization. So I think organizational construct, infusing data and insight into everybody's job, that is just something you do daily, just like your P&G example that
Right.
You pop up in your dashboard is incredibly important.
So following that conversation, are enterprises prepared to make the most of data-driven marketing? And certainly nearly more than 2/3 of our respondents said they plan to increase the use of data-driven marketing. Again, I can't imagine who wouldn't say they were going to increase it over the next 3 years. And 71% said that they plan to increase their reliance on data analytics, thankfully, for marketing decisions. But there clearly are challenges. So how do we get there? How do we move people along this spectrum of sort of walking and running and on their way to becoming a leader, which we would characterize as a result of this research, those who kind of use data at an enterprise level and not within siloed organizations?
I think, thinking of a best-in-class organization, somebody like Amazon, I really do think it has to be kind of top-down. I don't think this works if the CEO doesn't embrace it, right? Because how do you do it in an MBA class? You ask them, what's your recommendation? Wait a second, what are the facts? Where is the data? What's the analysis that you've done to support that recommendation? And you ask it time after time after time after time, so pretty soon it's just natural in the way in which they think, right? It's a pervasive way of thinking to use facts and numbers and analysis and to go seek it out to try to support your argumentation. And that comes from the top down, requiring it when they're making decisions and so forth. So that's why I keep coming back to, I know this isn't an easy answer, but I think the more that the folks at the top believe it and focus on changing the culture, the processes, making sure that the infrastructure is there, hiring the right external consultants in the short term to help support and create a better capability inside of the organization, doing odd things like perhaps a sabbatical, a 1-month training to send a senior executive off to get some executive education, or to go work at Amazon and acquire some new skills. I think the commitment has to be there. The desire, not just the desire, but the commitment has to be there so that they, expend resources to go invest in developing the people, the processes, the infrastructure, et cetera.
Good point.
I think you have to humanize the data. I think we spend a lot of time talking about algorithms and artificial intelligence and the scary, the scary or ominous things that are associated with that. But look at these great benefits. And if you want to drive change to the organization, the data or what comes out of it needs to be relatable. there are many organizations that we work with that when we start with them, they talk about their multi-channel touch points and omni-channel experience. No, you know what? You're not connecting with impressions, right? This is a human being living his or her life, who wakes up in the morning, who takes the train to work, who walks down to a coffee shop and then comes home. And if you connect to the experience that your customer is trying to have, or you want your customer to have, and then from there measure at each stop, at each, we call them interesting moments at turn, right? At each interesting moment, put the right measurement. All of a sudden the data is relatable and humanized, and it does allow the organization to get a picture of how you're interacting with your right customers. And once that happens, then you can affect the change, because instead of it being, we got 70 billion impressions, it's, we gave, you know, this number of many people a coupon after 2 p.m. to buy a latte at our store on the corner shop. That's the experience that you want to have. So I think humanizing the data is incredibly important.
That's a really good point. In fact, Kimberly and I were talking about this, sort of using data to, along this spectrum, to become a customer-driven organization, let alone a data-driven marketing organization. And some of the folks that I've had the chance to talk to really changed the organization by just asking everybody, including at the board level, to stop talking about data and talk about people, talk about customers. We gained X amount of customers today. Our share of customers is X, and it really is a small thing, but can really help transform the organization.
Bruce, I thought at the CMO Summit last month, one of the Verizon was talking about, just by stop measuring customer service reps on you know, how short of a time they could spend to resolve, actually customer happiness went up, because they had the wrong metric. And the right metric was, you know, are we actually solving problems and keeping customer happy? Once they put it in place, behavior across the organization changed. And I think there's tremendous amount of examples of other companies that have looked at how they were collecting data and how they defined it and humanized that touch point and that measurement to the point where they actually affected the right business behavior to get what they wanted.
Great point. And one of the things that, and maybe you can both speak to this, is that the focus on sort of end results of data-driven marketing, which is typically sort of digital marketing. There's a lot of data that comes from that. There's a lot of data that points to those moments. But there's often a lot of data that falls outside of a digital footprint. And how do you connect that so that you're not just focusing on, you know, sort of the last digital action that you somehow associate and you're correlating to behavior, but it's really not a causation around behavior. So how do you help folks think through the difference between correlation and causation? To use Nate Silver's analogy.
Well, I think what you're talking about is one of the big issues, which is being able to connect the dots from before, you know, customers come in, they're unknown, they're not a lead yet, they're on your website, they're shopping around your store. How do you collect that information, what they're doing on Twitter and Facebook and everything else, outside of when they become a lead? So unknown. I met with the CEO of Centasa this week. He calls it unknown to known, right? How do we go get more information on the unknown stage, start connecting the dots there, and then all the way through to profitability? And that's the challenge that everybody has. There are these big holes and they're making assumptions. So I'll give you an example. In a former life, we were trying to figure out which email campaign was going to have the greatest effect. And the challenge that we had is, as many retailers have, is you have your click-through rate, your open rates, you have your email metrics, right? And that's what you use to measure performance, which you don't know if it leads to revenue.
Right.
Well, we went, connected the dots, 4 different data sets, put everything together. It took us a long time, and we were then able to track what was happening on the website, so we could actually look at the unknown behavior, what was happening offline, what was happening once they used emails, all the way through to profitability. There was no relationship between click-through rate, open rates, and profitability. The intermediate metrics, which so many marketers rely on because they don't have the terminal financial performance, we're not related, right? And so this gets to one of the big problems. You're using data, but oh my gosh, we're using it in the wrong way because we don't have visibility into the other dots in the system. And so that's where the IT component comes in. You really need to be able to have access to all that information so that you're not making bad decisions.
Right.
I would just add to that. I think a lot more data about the physical world is actually available than it used to be, and so I think we have two things: is we can look at offline shopper data and bring that into an environment with digital data and look at correlations. We work very closely with one of the most progressive marketers out there, Kraft Foods, and they track digital behavior to how many boxes of macaroni and cheese and hot dogs they sell, and they can actually correlate those two together and see what's actually occurring, right? Like how their actions affect and how TV data brings in there. So I think that's one. The second thing I think we have to realize is that consumers' lives are increasingly becoming digital. So that unknown, that blind spot, as you point out, is less and less and less. I mean, there are Forbes' own research is showing just the amount of time spent in digital environments. And so when you have both of those things, so what's left of the blind spot is actually now being accessed by data, and consumers actually moving out of the blind spot into the sunlight, that problem is a little bit less, and the challenge is more on the understanding side. Are you actually setting up, to your point earlier, do you actually understand how to do the analysis correctly on this data so that you can determine the difference between causation or correlation and understand any flaws in the system? And that, again, sunshine is the best disinfectant. You don't want one person doing that. You want your entire team to be able to look at the data, look at the analysis, ask questions, poke around for flaws, and collaboratively come up with a model that everyone agrees and buys into that you can prove and test and move forward with. I think the first step for any organization is to understand what their business objective is. To be data-driven without understanding, we want to drive sales, we want to create a better customer experience. If you don't have that, if you just say, we're going to use data but continue the norm, you might get a little more efficient, but you're not going to get smarter as an organization as a whole. And so understanding why you want to use data, it may be, I want to be more efficient with my media spend. It may be, something's wrong with our UI and I can't figure it out and I need to do something. Or, in this region of the country, we're seeing sales drop off and we have no idea why, and maybe data can help us. Asking the hard question first and then backing out that experience is important. I think the next thing is, don't try the hard stuff first when it comes to, don't attempt the IT integration and the financial integration. There are great tools. Just like today, people will sign up for a system to go buy search keywords, right? You can go out and buy in the cloud and test and try with a little segment of your budget to understand the implications of it and watch it before you take on the full task of integration and rallying the troops. And I think that's important. The third thing is you need a champion. We've talked about this a little bit. We see companies that are successful, they name, for lack of a better term, a data czar. Somebody who has the technical skills and the clout internally to rally teams and relationships and understands how things are going together, pulling together, but someone who also has the business acumen to understand how to accomplish that goal. And it's an unofficial title that usually sticks around for 9 to 12 months of someone who rallies the troops. Because there is no one owner. Back to some of our first comments, there's not an owner yet of the data-driven marketing system inside someone. So appointing someone into that role allows clarity. You goal them, you give them authority throughout the organization, and then you allow them to test and work. I think that's incredibly important in making yourself successful. So start small, give it an owner, and understand clearly what your business objective is, and start by solving that problem first. And from there, you'll see all the other pieces that we've talked about will start to pan out in a way that makes sense for you.
As kind of we talked about as well is celebrating failure at the same time, because you can't experiment and innovate without learning what doesn't work at the same time as what works. So
giving permission to fail is important, as long as you have a culture of learning. And I think that's one thing. When you first look at data, the first time I ever saw data, in marketing, you're trained. You get some recorded data, but you try to get inside the head of your customer and you build the best campaign you can and you measure afterwards. And the first time you see real-time data and you realize that your instinct is right, 6% of the time, and that the data about who your customers are and why they buy are wildly different than what you actually thought and what your limited capabilities beforehand had, that's a moment of truth. You can either bury your head in the sand and take it as an ego hit, or you can take it as an opportunity to learn and be open to it. And so giving your teams permission to learn, permission to fail, let them understand that a portion of the budget they're spending or their time that they're spending should be on experimentation and failure, has got to be part of that culture. And it starts at the top. Back to your point about leadership. Management has to say, it's okay. What did we learn? Not why did we fail is probably the right question to ask.
Yeah. Perhaps sort of more down the tactical funnel than from the strategic level. The research that we did showed that 4 in 10 of our respondents said that they use data to change courses, messaging, strategies, targeting as a result of using data to do that. What do you make of those numbers? Are they lower or higher than you would have expected?
Well, I can tell you they're a lot lower. So then, this is terrible, but then I start wondering, I'd love to look at the data to understand what level, because perhaps some of the more senior people have had more latitude to make changes. Maybe some of the more junior people haven't. Look at so there's some things I'd like to go maybe explore at a more granular level within the data to understand that. But I think it's very, very surprising. What is your thought in terms of the gap? Why, if so many want it, they all value it, they think it's important. We've seen this over the last few years. Why are they not making changes based on their analysis?
Yeah, well, and my reaction to that was, well, then what are they using to make changes? So those are 6. What is it about that, right? I think that skill set's gap, that we see that a lot, is there's a skill set gap. I think there is a 80-year-old machine of how marketing gets done that is behind all of this. There's a slide that Mary Meeker does every year about time spent on media versus advertising dollars spent. Yes. And you see consistently marketers overspending on print and on radio when consumer time is more on internet and mobile devices. And you ask yourself why, and it's because we know how to make it work, right? Like, we know how to make the board slide work to justify that spend, even if we're overspending. And I think, habits die hard, and until, the culture of learning, until executives, the guard that aren't the digital natives, folks like me that used Ogilvy on advertising as our textbook, in there, until that culture of it's okay to be different, it's okay to try that, and the understanding that, yes, we understand there are case studies and norms on how to make TV and print successful, and I understand you don't have prior reference for how to make a mobile campaign successful, but that's okay. Do it anyway and learn how our brand can interact in the mobile channel, as an example. That mindset has to be infused in the culture, because otherwise you're going to have 6 out of 10 making decisions to do or not do something based on who knows what. And that's a little scary, as an executive. What are my people making decisions to change on, right? And while I trust their gut, I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure. I'm pretty certain I would want the backup associated with why those decisions are made.
Because the research showed that there's a huge delta between what we identified as leaders being those who at least self-identified themselves as taking an enterprise approach to data-driven marketing, that it's not siloed, it's not within organizations, it's a cultural shift. And that was a little over a third of our respondent base. And compare that to the laggards in the group, who were about 7%, who are thinking about it. And so there's a huge spectrum, and I think this is going to speak to the whole capabilities. You can't move forward if you don't know how to take that first step, or you don't have someone on your staff, or you don't have a partner who can help you do that. So let's take a little bit deeper dive into the skills and leadership aspect. 63% of our respondents say that they either are the CMO or they direct report to the CMO, uses data and analytics directly to deploy marketing campaigns, and those are the leaders. And just 13% of the laggards say that. But also at all those levels across the spectrum of marketing staff and analysts and data scientists, how are you at least talking to folks, or how have you in your experience dealt with bringing organizational change and using education as a way to do that?
I think some ways that I've seen this done in different applications are offsites with leadership teams. Going away and saying, this is a strategic decision, this is a critical strategic decision. We believe that this is going to be a core competency. If we don't build this, we are going to get run over. They work as a senior team. They come up with a strategic plan. They figure out how they're going to drive a cultural shift. Right? It's very hard for the marketing organization alone to drive this, or any one single function to drive it, if the organization wants it to be a competitive advantage. You know, on a small level, marketing can do things in its own right, but if the rest of the organization isn't data-driven and data-centered, and it's not embedded, it's going to be, they can do things within their own organization, but it's going to be difficult to actually have the magnitude of effect that the leaders in your research are showing they're having. So it seems to be, it has to be a priority, right? And that then means that there's a strategic plan around it.
Yeah, I think what I'm finding interesting is I think it's happening organically anyway, in pockets throughout the organization, in marketing, in customer service, even in sales in some way. And sales might be even more formalized. And if a leadership team doesn't build an overall strategic plan, you wind up creating a mess. You have different silos, different ways of looking at things, and different groups making determinations around what key metrics are appropriate, right? Is it clicks or is it actual revenue, to your point earlier? And so what we're finding when we go in and help, a lot of it is getting a senior leadership team not only to understand that they need a strategic plan, but to recognize it's happening already around them. I think what goes along with that is a recognition of the value of your own unique customer set. And organizations that aren't customer focused, may think about, well, we build a widget and we push it out and you will like it, right? You find that the organizations that embrace data are really trying to listen to what their customers are telling them through all channels, and quantitative volume of data is one, but they sit down and listen to customers in a qualitative fashion, but in this very systemic way on a regular basis as well. And those organizations that are in touch with what their customers want are looking at look at data as a way to infuse that culture of being customer oriented down in a much more quantitative, systemic way. And I think that that's one of the ways that we get organizations to start seeing the value, which is their customer set is unique. They're talking to you from all these different channels. You're just not listening. You're not listening because you don't have the right tools to listen. But you're doing a great job over here, qualitatively, right? You do that customer survey once a year. What if you could do that every day? Right? What if you could do it every day and then use it and act on it as an organization and be nimble on it? And that shift, that's when the light bulb seems to go on with senior executives. And I think from an organization, what organization doesn't want to be customer centric, right? And that's usually why you see some of these pockets inside large organizations pop up, because they're trying to be much more customer centric. They believe it's part of their job, and they're using external tools to collect data as a way to do that. And knitting these things together give you that bigger picture, that more complete view of the customer, that then helps to drive that culture shift you need. Great.
So perhaps some of the folks who are watching us today may not have the ability to influence strategy at an enterprise level. They may be lower down in the organization, and there's, what would the advice be? How do you coach up? I mean, because often, quite frankly, the skill sets in here are going to be, it's somewhat a generational thing to some extent. And so what advice would you give to folks to how to coach up? How do you become an advocate and an evangelist when it's not necessarily your responsibility to do that, or you have what the organization has deemed the responsibility to do that.
Well, I think that's the key, right? It is your responsibility. If are you there for a paycheck, or are you there to help the company grow and actually advance your career? If your organization is not thinking about data today, it is a career opportunity for you to wave the flag, to jump up and down and scream and dance and say you're missing out on an opportunity. I think there are tools on the desktop today that don't require IT integration, spreadsheets for one, that can get you started in showing the value of this. And I think the second thing is ask questions. What if we knew more? Do we know enough? What are we missing? Ask questions in staff meetings, but raise your hand is the first thing. And if your company does not have religion around data, be that advocate for it, and speak loudly. Like your company's missing out on an opportunity.
Yeah, the one thing I would add is you also want to do it being cognizant of the people that you're trying to influence up, right? Some people are more open to it. Like if you're a brand new brand assistant at a company, or you just graduated with an MBA and you're starting at the bottom level, you want to make sure that you can read folks, and you want to do it in a way that you can actually influence them, right? And so maybe perhaps one way is to actually do some analysis and then try to really simplify it and take it in some sort of presentation and say, here's something that I've seen. Here's an analysis I did. See what the reaction is. Some people might be threatened by it if they're not data comfortable.
Right.
Others might not. So you have to, this is one of those things where you have to try to do it within the culture of the organization, the acceptance level of the people above you. But you do want to try to do it. If you have skills that can benefit the company, just try to do it within the, whatever the cultural style is of the company.
Show a win too. Yeah. I think back to my earlier points. If you are a new brand manager and you can build something in a very simple model that you can run on your desktop, and you can show a win, 5x ROI, reduced order time by X, and here's how I'd be able to tell the story of how you did it. That's powerful to influence someone who may not understand data. They may not understand the algorithm you used, or the tools you used, or pixel fires, or whatever you want to talk about that actually created that environment. But what they will understand is you got your job done faster and you made the company more money, and they want to understand how you did that and duplicate that around the organization. So you've got to be ready to defend yourself, but show some wins. Show how it actually can apply to the business.
The other thing I would say is I think you want to find a company where you fit in, right?
Because that's what it's all about, right?
So I think, and this may be a bit of a tactical answer, the most unique data set you have is of your customers, right? Your existing customers. There's a reason why they bought them, and that reason is different than even your closest competitor. The example I always give is Coke and Pepsi. And on the surface, it's sugar water, right? But the data between Coke and Pepsi users reveals wildly different types of behaviors, attributes, and motivations for why they identify with one, fizzy water over the other fizzy water. And so, starting with your own customer data, starting with your own customers, and figuring out what led them to buy, what leads them to be loyal, is the first way to get started. It's data you already have. Marketing departments usually have that fairly easily, right? They definitely can talk to the customers, and so getting access to that and starting to work with that is the way to get started. And I think back to my earlier point, understand the business objective. Is your objective to find more customers like my high value customers? Is your objective to reduce churn? Start looking at the data you have and ask those questions, and that's going to lead you to, we need to know X, we need to do Y, we need to do Z, and that will then begin building your plan. But the uniqueness don't underestimate the uniqueness of what the industry would call first party data, and what a valuable asset that is into all aspects of the company. It's completely under leveraged right now by most companies, and if you can activate and unlock that, you're well on your way.
I think just to add to that, one of the things that struck me recently at some of the different conferences, among CMOs is how important dashboarding is, right? And dashboards seem to be a bit of this catalyst, which is mapping out, doing an audit of the data that you have, and understanding of what your strategies are. Where is the fit? How does this reflect on a dashboard? Not an easy process to create a dashboard, right? It requires a lot of time, energy, effort to try to think through how everything's going to map down. But it's so important. It's almost what's driving it is the need to merchandise to the rest of the C-level what you're doing within marketing, right? So there's a lot of external pressures that are driving it, but I've noticed in a lot of conversations that either people don't feel like the dashboards they have are very effective, and so that's driving a lot of this, or they don't have one at all. Right? And that's been a big topic of interest lately.
You're bringing up a good point. One of the first places we usually get involved with a company is around taxonomy of data, which is what supports a dashboard, right? How are you collecting and organizing the data you have? And does it map to the questions you're trying to answer, which ultimately surface up to that dashboard? And I think that, when I talk about first-party data, understanding how you're organizing it, finding that hole and saying, where can we get this, leads you to better decisions, and that ultimately leads to a much more meaningful dashboard because you've organized it in a way, and that starts getting you a bit more systemic about bringing data in.
And what's great about this then reflects on your point about a win. When you bring that dashboard to the C-suite, to the board meeting, and you can actually start using it to help merchandise results and to help identify where there are issues and so forth. That can be a very visible win for the department. Also potentially affect other departments, right, who don't have their own dashboards.
Right. How do we make that red a green? And once you get that question, then you've started, right? Then everyone's bought in.
Exactly.
We trust it, and we're ready to roll.
And this might be the last question, and it might even be the most challenging question to answer, for both of you and for the folks watching, is what are the metrics that matter? What do you put in that dashboard? So, make it 3 things, right? Too many data points and people can't put it in perspective. One is maybe not enough. Where's that sweet spot of a metric that matters?
Yeah. The way we answer that for customers, the way I answer it for my team is it's unique to everybody. And I don't mean to punt that, but we work at Kraft, and it's hot dog and macaroni and cheese sales. We work with a very large insurance carrier, right? And it is forms completed on the internet for the purpose of getting a phone call by an agent, right? What your business is, I think to Kimberly's point before, it's not those mezzanine metrics of clicks and things. It's about revenue. It's about revenue in the right segments. And that's what needs to be on that dashboard. And if you're going to optimize to clicks, or you're going to optimize, I'm in B2B, right? So we could very easily optimize to meetings booked, because that's a great marketing metric. But if it's not driving revenue and pipeline, we're not doing the right things. And that behavior comes from what's that goal, and that goal is usually bigger than marketing. Right? We want X. We want X% share. We want Y% loyalty. We want Z% of the hot dog market. And that's what needs to be on that dashboard.
Yeah, I was going to say the academic answer is it depends, right? So it's really the same answer, which is it depends on the industry, it depends on the company, the customer, the business challenges, the objectives, the strategies, the goals. And that's why dashboards are breathing, right? They have to change over time and morph based on, the strategy shifted. And so now it doesn't quite fit with where the company's going. So but I will tell you, as somebody who's developed from scratch dashboards in 2 companies, it is a multi-month process, engaging a lot of different people, and it's quite painful, but it actually is a great learning experience about your business, about all the different sources of data, what connects to what. Right? Dashboard is trying to give you a temperature check. Where do I have my problem? So I can go dig deeper. It's but it's unique to every organization. It has to be.
Start somewhere, perhaps, on that journey towards becoming a digitally savvy, data-driven marketing organization. I think that's a pretty good coda to our conversation. And thank you both. There's a lot of sound advice and great examples of what folks can do. And you could stay tuned, and we will answer your questions live in just a minute. So thank you for joining us.